I sat at the heavy mahogany table in the lawyer's office, the pen feeling like a block of ice in my hand. Across from me, my fiancé, Marcus, wouldn't meet my eyes. He just stared at a fixed point on the wall, his jaw tight with a guilt that did nothing to help me. Beside him, his mother, Catherine Thorne, watched me with a look of serene, triumphant satisfaction. This was her victory. This brutal, insulting prenup was her masterpiece. She had forced it upon us, a non-negotiable condition of our marriage, a document designed to remind me that I was nothing more than a temporary guest in their world. But as I looked at the signature line, I thought about the one secret I had never told them, the one man they had never heard of. I knew that in a few days, at the signing for their company's legacy project, a man would walk into their boardroom who would make that satisfied smile disappear from Catherine Thorne's face forever. Before I tell you what happened when my father walked through that door, make sure you hit that subscribe button because this story is about to take turns you never saw coming. The stroke of a pen was meant to seal my insignificance. They had no idea it was about to trigger their ruin. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. My name is Naya, and for a year I thought the love of a good man would be enough. I was about to learn that a good man who is also a coward is no man at all. Our story began not in a mansion, but in the stale, fluorescent-lit room of a city planning commission meeting. I was an urban planner, fighting for a small, local developer trying to build affordable housing against a corporate behemoth. I was passionate, maybe a little loud, armed with data and a belief in community-led development. He was Marcus Thorne, the handsome, well-dressed heir to Thorne Estates, the very behemoth I was arguing against. He was supposed to be my adversary. But as I spoke, I saw something shift in his eyes. He wasn't looking at me like an opponent. He was listening. After the meeting, which my side miraculously won, he approached me. "You were incredible," he said, his smile genuine. "You have more fire and integrity than anyone in my company. Can I buy you a coffee and have you tell me everything I'm doing wrong?" That coffee turned into a year of falling in love. Marcus was different from the world he came from. He was kind, attentive, and fascinated by my work. He would spend weekends with me, walking through the neighborhoods I was trying to revitalize, listening as I pointed out the architectural bones of a community. He said I made him see the city not as a collection of assets, but as a collection of homes. I thought he was my partner, a good man trapped in a gilded cage who, with me, could finally be free. I believed him when he said he loved me more than his family's name. I believed our love was the foundation for a new kind of legacy. I just didn't realize his foundation was built on sand. The first cracks appeared at their Long Island estate, a place so sterile and sprawling it felt less like a home and more like a museum for lonely furniture. His mother, Catherine Thorne, was the museum's formidable curator. She greeted me with a handshake that was as brief and cold as a winter afternoon. Her smile never touched her eyes, which performed a swift, brutal calculus of my dress, my shoes, and my background. At dinner, she turned her attention to me, a predator toying with its food. "Nia, dear," she began, "Marcus tells us you work for the city. How noble. It must be so rewarding to help those less fortunate." The implication was clear. I was one of them. "I don't work for the city," I replied, my voice even. "I run my own consulting firm specializing in sustainable urban planning and community benefit agreements." Catherine's perfectly sculpted eyebrow arched. "Oh, a consultant. So you tell people how to build things. How charming." Every question was a veiled insult, every compliment a backhanded slap. She asked about my family, and when I told her my mother was a retired teacher and that I didn't have a relationship with my father, I saw a flicker of confirmation in her eyes. I was exactly who she thought I was. A girl with no pedigree, no connections, no name. Marcus, my brave Marcus, sat beside me, shrinking with every passing moment. He'd clear his throat, offer a weak, "Mom, Nia's work is very important," but his voice lacked conviction. He was a guest at his own dinner table. On the agonizingly long drive back to the city, he finally broke the silence. "I'm so sorry, Nia," he whispered, his hand finding mine in the dark. "She's just protective of the family name. Once she gets to know you, she'll see." I loved him, and my love was a willful blindness. I chose to believe him, ignoring the cold knot of dread in my stomach that told me I was making a terrible mistake. That first dinner was not an anomaly. It was the blueprint. Over the next year, I became a fixture of their family functions, a living testament to their son's poor taste. My presence was tolerated, but never welcomed. At the annual Thorne Estates holiday party, Catherine would introduce Marcus to developers and politicians, her hand possessively on his arm, while I was left to stand awkwardly at his side. If someone made the social error of engaging me in conversation, Catherine would swoop in with a breezy, "Nia is interested in our little community projects," effectively dismissing my entire career as a quaint hobby. Marcus's cowardice grew into a predictable, painful rhythm. In the face of his mother's cruelty, he would go silent, his discomfort a poor substitute for defense. The apologies would come later, always in private, always filled with empty promises. "I'll talk to her, I promise. She doesn't mean it the way it sounds. It's just easier if we don't cause a scene." I began to realize that for him, my dignity was the price of peace. The humiliation was constant. We'd be at a gala, and Catherine would loudly praise the daughter of a family friend for her good breeding. We'd be at a family brunch, and she would reminisce about Marcus's ex-girlfriend, a woman from a suitable family, sighing about what could have been. I was living a life of 1,000 tiny paper cuts, bleeding out slowly while the man who claimed to love me held the blade. I was enduring it all because I still clung to the memory of the man who had seen my fire at that commission meeting, hoping he was still in there somewhere, buried under the weight of his mother's expectations. This is the secret I carried, the truth that fortified me through those months of quiet degradation. My father, the man I told them I had no relationship with, was Robert Vance. To the world of architecture and design, that name was the equivalent of a myth. In the 1990s, he had founded a design tech firm that revolutionized sustainable architecture, creating the software that made green buildings scalable and profitable. He sold that company for a fortune, becoming a quiet force in the industry before he simply disappeared. Disgusted by the corporate greed that had co-opted his vision, he had divorced my mother, left the public eye, and become a recluse. I was raised by my mother, a woman of immense strength and integrity, who taught me that self-worth was built, not inherited. I chose to keep my father's name and legacy separate from my own life. I wanted to succeed on my own terms. I didn't want the shadow of his name to obscure my own work. We were estranged, yes, but not out of animosity. It was a mutual, respectful distance. I knew who he was, and he knew I was determined to forge my own path. I was the heiress to a legacy far more profound than the Thornes could ever comprehend. A legacy of innovation, integrity, and the quiet power of building something that lasts. I didn't need their money or their name. I was a Vance, and I was waiting to see if they were capable of recognizing value when it wasn't engraved on a gold-plated plaque. For a full year, I gave them that test. And for a full year, they proved they were utterly, hopelessly blind. The situation escalated when Marcus proposed. On a windswept beach at sunset, with just the two of us, he was the man I fell in love with again. He spoke of a future where we would build our own world, away from the judgment of his family. For a fleeting moment, I believed him. The next morning, my phone rang. It was Catherine. "Nia," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "Marcus told me the wonderful news. We are all so thrilled. Of course, as I'm sure you understand, for a family with the history and assets of ours, A prenuptial agreement is simply a matter of course. A formality, really. Our lawyers will be in touch with you. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a royal decree. The formality arrived a week later, a thick document that felt less like a legal agreement and more like a declaration of war. The terms were designed to be as insulting as possible. In the event of a divorce, I would receive a one-time payment so paltry it was clearly meant as a joke. I was to waive any and all claims to any asset, present or future, related to Thorne Estates or any other family holding. It even had a clause about public decorum, stating that any action that brought disrepute upon the Thorne name would render the agreement null and void. It was a leash, a gag, a legal document screaming that I was a temporary, untrustworthy outsider who needed to be managed. It was Catherine's final, definitive statement on my worth. The final straw wasn't the document itself, but the moment Marcus brought it into our home. He placed it on our coffee table with the funereal air of a man delivering bad news he had no intention of fighting. He sat beside me on the sofa, took my hands, and began the speech I knew was coming. "Nia, please try to understand," he started, his voice low and pleading. "This isn't about us. It's about my mother. It's about the family business. It's just a piece of paper. It doesn't change how I feel about you." But it did. It changed everything. Because in that moment, he wasn't my partner. He was his mother's son. He was an emissary from the people who despised me, asking me to sign a contract codifying my own worthlessness to make his life easier. He was choosing their comfort over my dignity. The love I had fought so hard to protect, the hope I had for the man he could be, it all evaporated. All that was left was a cold, clear certainty. I looked at him, at his handsome, miserable face, and I made a decision. I would sign it. I would play the part of the compliant, poor girl they thought I was. I would smile and accept my place. And then, I would let them walk straight into the trap they had set for themselves. That night, after he fell into a relieved sleep, I stepped out onto the balcony and made a phone call to a number I hadn't dialed in 5 years. "Dad," I said when he answered, "it's Nia. I need you to come to New York. I think it's time you met the Thornes." My father and I spoke for hours that night. I laid out the whole story, every slight, every insult, culminating in the prenup. I wasn't asking for a rescue. I was presenting a set of facts. When I was finished, there was a long silence on the line. I heard him take a slow, deep breath. "They disrespected you," he said, his voice a low rumble of controlled fury. "They disrespected your mother. They disrespected our name." He wasn't just my estranged father anymore. He was Robert Vance, a man who had walked away from the world of corporate titans because he found them lacking in integrity. The Thornes were everything he despised. "All right, Nia," he said, his voice shifting from paternal anger to the cool, calculated tone of a strategist. "Here is what we are going to do." The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Thorne Estates was in the final stages of its most ambitious project, a massive luxury development on the waterfront called Founders Point. It was their legacy project, the one that would cement their name for another generation. The entire venture was being financed by a mysterious and deeply private investment group, Vanguard Capital, who had acquired the land decades ago and had provided all the seed capital. The Thornes had never met the group's principal. They only dealt with his lawyers. The final merger signing, where Thorne Estates would officially acquire the project and its assets, was in 2 weeks. That, my father explained, was where this would end. He would be there, and I would be there, at his side. The boardroom at Thorne Estates was on the top floor, a cathedral of glass and steel overlooking the city. Catherine was in her element, presiding over the enormous table like a queen holding court. She was radiant, dressed in a sharp white suit, the victor enjoying her spoils. Marcus sat beside her, looking pale and tense, avoiding my gaze. Their team of lawyers shuffled papers, their faces grim and professional. They were all waiting for the representative from Vanguard Capital to arrive and finalize the deal of a lifetime. I was there as Marcus's fiancée, a silent ornament invited to witness the family's greatest triumph. The double doors of the boardroom swung open. A man in a tailored suit walked in, one of Vanguard's lawyers. But he was not alone. The man who followed him in was my father, Robert Vance. He was dressed simply, in a dark turtleneck and slacks, but he carried with him an aura of quiet, unshakable authority that seemed to suck all the air out of the room. Catherine and her husband stared, confused. "Mr. Vance?" Catherine stammered, a line of confusion creasing her brow. She knew the name, of course. He was a legend in the industry, even in his seclusion. "What a surprise! What are you doing here?" One of their lawyers went white. He knew. The Vanguard lawyer cleared his throat. "Mr. and Mrs. Thorne," he said formally. "Allow me to introduce the founder and sole principal of Vanguard Capital, the man who quietly acquired this land 30 years ago, and the original architect of the master plan for this entire estate, Mr. Robert Vance." My father looked past them, his eyes finding me. He gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod. Then he turned his gaze, cold as steel, back to Catherine. "I believe," he said, his voice quiet but carrying an immense weight, "you have a prenuptial agreement for my daughter to sign. But before she does, I think we have some new terms to discuss regarding my controlling interest in— what did you call it? Your family's legacy?" The word legacy hung in the air, a poisoned dart. The immediate aftermath was a symphony of sputtering shock and dawning horror. Catherine's face, which had been a mask of smug triumph, crumbled into disbelief. Her husband looked as though he'd been struck by lightning. Their lawyers began whispering frantically to each other, their faces ashen. They understood the implications immediately. My father, Robert Vance, didn't just own the land under their legacy project. He was Vanguard Capital. He was their silent primary investor, the financial bedrock upon which their entire future was built. My father's lawyer stepped forward and calmly placed a new set of documents on the table. "As the majority stakeholder in this joint venture," he announced to the room, "Mr. Vance is exercising his right, per Section 7B of the partnership agreement, to dissolve the partnership due to a material breach of good faith." Catherine found her voice, a strangled, incredulous squawk. "Breach of good faith? That's preposterous." My father answered her himself, his voice never rising. "Is it? For the past year, you have systematically insulted, demeaned, and humiliated my daughter. You have treated her as a worthless gold digger. You presented her with a legal document so insulting that it amounts to a declaration of her social and personal insignificance. You have done this to the daughter of the man who holds the fate of your company in his hands. You tell me, Mrs. Thorne, if that is not the very definition of bad faith." Marcus, my fiancé, finally looked at me, his eyes wide with a complete, tragic, and utterly useless understanding. The empire he was meant to inherit, the legacy he had sacrificed my dignity to protect, was all built on the genius of my father. His family had been worshipping at the altar of a man whose daughter they treated like dirt. A year later, I stood with my father on a windswept hill overlooking the waterfront. The half-finished steel skeleton of the Founders Point development was gone, dismantled months ago. In its place, construction had begun on a new project, the Vance Community Trust, a revolutionary model for mixed-income housing, public green spaces, and sustainable, community-owned businesses. My project, our project. Thorne Estates had collapsed. Faced with the immediate demand to repay all of Vanguard Capital's seed money and with their reputation in tatters, they were forced into a fire sale of their assets. They were ruined, not by a hostile takeover, but by the weight of their own arrogance. Catherine Thorne, I heard, was no longer a queen of New York society. She was a cautionary tale whispered about at the galas she could no longer afford to attend. Marcus was working a mid-level management job for a developer in another city. He had sent me a long, rambling letter filled with regret and apologies. I read the first page and threw it away. His remorse was his own burden to carry, not mine. My life was no longer about him or them or their small, suffocating world. My life was about building something real. My father's gift to me wasn't just his power. It was the clarity to use my own. They had tried to make me sign a document defining my worth. They learned too late that a person's true value is not something that can be negotiated or signed away. It is something you build, something you own, and something you should never, ever let anyone else define. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt like your worth was being questioned, smash that like button and subscribe for more stories about reclaiming your narrative. True legacy isn't about the name on a building. It's about the integrity of the person who built it. Drop a comment and tell me, what does building your own legacy mean to you? I read every single one. Until next time, remember that you should never have to shrink yourself to fit into anyone else's small world. Build your own. The view is much better.